As one of Marvel's most popular characters, Spider-Man has had a long career in several different mediums. But none of that is important to this list. With the upcoming release of the much-anticipated PS4 exclusive Marvel Spider-Man, we're going to take a step back through history and take a look at Spider-Man's long career in video games. Some are good, some are bad, and a lot are just simply okay. In doing research for this list, I realized that there are some games that I miss playing. There's some games I didn't even know existed, especially a lot of those earlier titles. But none of that matters. Let's get into it. Things all started in Spider-Man on the Atari 2600. This is the very first Spider-Man game published in the ancient days of 1982. Man, I feel old now. The gameplay is very simple, as it was the norm for the time. Spider-Man climbs the building avoiding the dangers. Also, based on the color scheme, the stick figure is definitely Spider-Man. Next up, we have Quest Probe Spider-Man. Honestly, there isn't much to this game. The second in a series of text adventure-based games on Marvel characters. The commands were all text-based and featured static photos. It was a simpler time. Try not to judge. Number 3 is Amazing Spider-Man on the Amiga. Published in 1990, this game is a simple platformer that doesn't allow Spider-Man to swing from webs or punch any bad guys. You shoot a web at them and freeze them for a few seconds. Haha, wee! Number 4 is Spider-Man the video game in the arcade. Kids, arcades were a place in most malls where you could go and spend some of your hard-earned quarters to spend time with your friends. When you weren't winning tickets to exchange for prizes that weren't worth anywhere near as much as you spent on them, you could play side-scrollers featuring some of your favorite characters. Among the most popular were most likely the X-Men or the Ninja Turtles, and just as good, if not as well remembered, I honestly don't remember this one being in any of the arcades that I went to, is the Spider-Man game, which saw you and 3 friends play as the Webhead, the Submariner, Black Cat, and Hawkeye, which I'm sure made sense at the time. Next up for number 5, we have Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin on the Sega. Released for various systems from 90 to 93, this game was a side-scrolling platformer that saw Spider-Man facing off against some of his most popular villains in order to stop the Kingpin at the end. The graphics were great for the time and had some fun features like being able to take photos to sell to the Daily Bugle. When it was released in 1993 on the Sega CD, the game featured animated cutscenes, voice acting, and extra levels. This game was very well received at the time. For number 6, we have Amazing Spider-Man on the Game Boy. Now, we all have fond memories of our Game Boy and the ability that it gave us to portably play our games. Well, honestly, while there are some very good games on the Game Boy system, I don't think this one falls into that category. The gameplay is very simplistic, and the game only lasts about an hour, so it's like a hard pass, because could you imagine driving around trying to get all of that stuff to play that for an hour, and then putting it on your counter and just leaving it there? Next up, we have Spider-Man with the return of the Sinister Six on various systems. Now, much like the Game Boy, there are a lot of fond memories of the NES era. Some truly great games, and this is not one of them. While you could clearly see what was happening and the fact that it was Spider-Man, the gameplay was bland and boring. No reason to emulate this is all I'm saying. Number 8 is Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge. Another game I somehow missed, but released in 92, it said that the controls were slightly awkward but featured some good graphics. On the plus side, you didn't just get to play as Spider-Man. Depending on the level, you also got to play as either Wolverine, Gambit, Storm, or Cyclops. Using their various powers, the group worked with Spider-Man to take down the villain Arcade in his murder world. Next up, we have Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage. Yes! This was my game as a kid. I have some fond memories of playing this one. This game featured a strong story with cutscenes pulled straight out of the comics. Gameplay-wise, it was a standard beat-em-up, but this game allowed players to be Spider-Man or Venom in co-op action. This game was a blast that had guest appearances for some of Marvel's most popular characters, as well as some that people just wonder who they were. As a kid, I had no idea who Cloak and Dagger were. To this day, I still don't really know who Cloak and Dagger are. For number 10, we have the Venom Spider-Man game Separation Anxiety. The sequel to Maximum Carnage, this game continued the straightforward gameplay. This time, it follows the plot of Venom's Lethal Protector storyline, featuring more guest appearances of Marvel characters and some of Venom's evil children. Number 11, we have Spider-Man the Animated Series. If you were a kid in the 90s, the Spider-Man animated series was your version of Spider-Man. The animated series was fantastic and is still amazing to this day. Luckily, this game didn't sully that good name. I will say no more. For number 12, we have the Amazing Spider-Man Web of Fire. Before doing research for this list, I'd honestly never really heard of this, but come on, the Sega 32X, who really heard of the games on that thing? When this game was released, the game shipped in so little quantities and had so little coverage that some people actually thought it had been canceled and was never released. According to the reviews, the gameplay wasn't anything special, but it was apparently a solid brawler. With its small quantities, it has become highly sought after by collectors. For number 13, we have Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro on the PlayStation PlayStation. Here it is, Spidey's big jump into the 3D world, and it was awesome! Made by Neversoft, the guys that made Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. In 2000 and 2001, these games featured web slinging and thug punching that truly made you feel like you were Spider-Man. Featuring brand new storylines, amazing cutscenes, and alternate costumes from the entire Spider-Man history, along with guest appearances by pretty much all of Spider-Man's supporting cast, with Venom having some of the funniest lines. It was truly a great moment. For 14, we have Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, Sinister Six. Released at the same time as the PlayStation games, these ones came out on Game Boy Color, and they stayed true to the side-scrolling platformers of the past. Luckily, these games had come a long way since the original Game Boys, and they weren't god-awful. For number 15, we have Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace Battle for New York on the Game Boy Advance. Released in 2001, this game made the jump into the more powerful Game Boy Advance. Well reviewed, this game featured updated graphics, strong animation, great music, and more free-roaming gameplay than was featured in older Game Boy titles. I've not played this one, but it is said to be the best handheld Spider-Man game. I will say nothing of the Battle of New York, as I did not play this game. For number 16, we have Spider-Man the Movie Games, various ones, and I'm going to lump all of these together. The Sam Raimi movies were quite good for their time, excluding, of course, the third one. We will not speak of the third one. Everyone break into a Spider-Man dance. But let's be honest, tie-in games are rarely good. The first Spider-Man game to be released was in 2002 and was actually okay of a game. It was decent. It featured solid gameplay that remained similar to the PlayStation games, although it went for a more realistic style to match the movies. The game based on the second movie, released in 2004, featured the first fully open-world Spider-Man game, which would go on to become a standard for all of the future games. Web slinging was also upgraded with a new physics engine that made it fun to just swing through the city, and it also included collectibles and a number of side missions that included stopping muggers and catching that damn balloon. Stupid balloons! The third game, the game that we will not speak of the movie that it's related to, was released in 2007 and did much of the same thing, but it was the low point of the three. Similar to the last games, yet somehow less good, the game was just kind of boring, and it seemed less polished. At least there isn't any lame dancing minigame, and I kind of wish there was. Now for number 17, we're going to put all of the Ultimate Spider-Man games together because they use the open world gameplay style that became popular with the character over the years. This game was the first one that truly seemed like a comic book come to life. Released in 2007, the game's plot is based on the Ultimate comic series, including a number of villains, and even the ability to play as Ultimate Venom as he terrorized the city, which was the first time you could actually play as Venom in his more villainous role. It also featured cel-shaded art styles and is an excellent game that I strongly recommend. For number 18, we have Spider-Man Web of Shadows. Spider-Man was in the fully open world realm now, and the 2008 game featured a fun original plot that saw the symbiotes trying to take over the city. You also had the ability to change from normal Spider-Man to symbiote Spider-Man, and you had good and evil options throughout the game. They had appearances by Wolverine, who became possessed by a symbiote, Nick Fury, and other characters that really made the game feel like you're a part of the Marvel Universe. Also, at one point, Mary Jane is fending off an army of zombie symbiotes with a shotgun. What is not to love? In our number 19 slot, we have Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. What's better than one Spider-Man? How about 4 Spider-Men? Spider-Mans? Released in 2010, the game stepped away from the free-roaming world that Spider-Man games have become known for, and instead went back to a more linear-level structure from the older PlayStation titles. The story featured 4 versions of the Spider-Mans that were brought together to save the multiverse. I think I read a comic about this called Spider-Verse. Each version of Spider-Man featured a level that had a different gameplay style, art style, and voice actors throughout Spider-Man's history. The Amazing Spider-Man levels were your standard gameplay and captured the feel of the 90s animated series. Ultimate Spider-Man saw the web slinger in a symbiote suit with Venom powers and had a cel-shaded look similar to the Ultimate Spider-Man game. Spider-Man 2099 was more action-heavy and looked like a shiny cyberpunk world, while Spider-Man Noir was a black and white game that featured stealth mechanics. The mixed-up gameplay styles stopped it from getting stale, and the storyline was actually a lot of fun. For number 20, we have Spider-Man Edge of Time. While not as well reviewed as Shattered Dimensions, Edge of Time allowed the players to switch between present Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2099. The game continued the fun original plot style of Dimensions and once again stuck with more linear levels instead of it being open world. And lastly, we have The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. With the reboot of the Spider-Man movie franchise, the new games decided to return to the open world games that had done well in the past. Story-wise, the games took place in their own respective movies and added in more elements from the comic book universe. While okay, the games didn't do anything special. Gone were the multiple Spider-Mans and varied gameplay. And instead it was by the numbers open world that didn't do anything new for the series. And that brings us to today's Spider-Man. The Spider-Man, the one that's out today or tomorrow, or whenever this video goes live. I hope you guys enjoyed this list, giving you a little bit of a history on the Spider-Man stuff. We were going to do like a lore dive, but all of these games don't link up, so there's no lore dive to give you, so we thought it'd be more fun to give you a history of the Spider-Man games. Did you know about every single one of these? And if you didn't, let me know about the games you didn't know about in the comments down below. I'll see you next time right here at Eligible Monster.